getting home late. Maybe we could come over to your house. We'll bring clam chowder.
Oh,
I said, of
course.
course.
Of course.
Nice.
Those are good friends to have.
Yeah.
Well, Ron's from Michigan. Goulash is his specialty.
Oh.
It's really good. Goulash, and then, of course, the pasties that it goes into. If y'all go to Michigan, you have that.
Oh, I didn't know that was a Michigan thing.
What?
Goulash. All right.
Negative.
Okay. Hey, you got it figured out?
Elevator meeting.
Okay. Okay, we are in Exodus chapter 20. But we're not for long. But we're going to, Exodus chapter 20 is where we've been, where we would be normally. So, okay. Okay. So, in Exodus chapter 20, we've been going through from the beginning of Genesis. We're now to this place in Exodus, and we've been following the history. It's basically the history of the Jewish people at this time and how things started from Adam and Eve on. We've been talking. And one of the concepts that we've been really, really focusing on is that none of this is about Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses. This is not what this is about. This is about who God is and how God deals with his people. That's what this story is about. We don't know very much about these other people that are involved with God's work, but we know what God has done and why he's done it through this time. So from the very beginning of Adam and Eve, this has been about God and his work. And so we've talked about that multiple times. And now we get to Exodus chapter 20, and we come to the 10 Commandments. When we get to the 10 Commandments, we read through chapter 20, and then it started talking about all the laws. Starting in chapter 21, 22, it begins to give details of the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments were the law, what God gave the people to teach them about himself. The theme does not change. The 10 Commandments are about God. They're about what God wants us to do, what's pleasing to him. And that's the whole point of having the 10 Commandments, is to show us what's pleasing to him. Now, let's pretend that Don Luce is 10 years old. And his daddy comes to him and says, now, Don, you're going to do some chores around the house and some things, and I'm going to give you $1 for doing those chores. And I'm going to give you that $1 in 10 dimes. And 1 dime you're going to put in the offering plate at church. And 3 dimes you're going to put in your piggy bank. And then it's up to you what you do with the other 6 dimes. What is the father teaching Don?
To be a good steward.
To be a good steward of his money. At $1, right? And did he give him any choice?
No.
Just said 1 goes here, 3 goes, he tells him that. And then his choices are with the 6. So there is some leeway. So what would happen if Don were 60 years old and his dad came and told him the same thing? That would be a little odd. Right? That would be just a little odd. That's not the way it works. At 60 years old, Don is making his own decisions about his money. Would it be likely that Don would remember the lesson of his father and model his giving or his management of his money similar to that instruction? That would be obvious, right? Then why don't we get it that God early on gave the people the 10 Commandments, like a father sitting down with his son and saying, and later in the new covenant, he says, I'm going to tell you more. I'm going to extend the law now. I'm going to explain to you the why of the law. And in the new covenant, we're expected to make some of our own decisions based on the concept, the real concept. So that's what happens between what we call the old covenant and the new covenant. What we call the old covenant at that time was the covenant. What did they have before that? Nothing. They must have had some kind of rules, some few rules, because like we saw with Cain and Abel, they had brought an offering that was pleasing and an offering that was not. So there had to be something going on, but it's not very quantified. We don't really know exactly what it was, right? So those things, that was kind of a loose thing. So God then teaches, we saw God teaching Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and them about himself, who he is and what he wants and what is pleasing to him. Now with the children of Israel who've been in Egypt for 400 years, He's taking them out of Egypt, and they don't know God at all. All they know are the old stories. They just know the old stories and the promises that were made to their forefathers. They don't know God themselves, and God now is teaching them about himself. And he gives them these 10 commandments, which are like the dimes. He's saying, okay, look, don't murder. These are the things that are going to be the rules or the laws, things, the commandments that I want you to follow. So out of the rules he gave in Exodus 20, the first 5 are shells. You shall have no other gods. You shall not have any idols. You will not, don't misuse the name of Jehovah. And you shall keep the Sabbath, and you shall honor your father and mother. They're the shells, the things that you're supposed to do. You shall do this. And then numbers 6 through 10 are the shall nots. Don't murder, don't commit adultery, don't steal, don't lie, don't covet. So we have the do's and the do nots. And that is in the Old Covenant. And that is important to us today. It is true. The 10 Commandments are true. And they're true for us now. But Jesus in Matthew 5 begins to extend the understanding of the 10 Commandments. So we're going to look, before you turn, we're going to go look in Matthew 5. But if you'll notice in chapter 21, 22, 23 of Exodus, it gives more of the details of keeping those 10 Commandments, details about the 10 Commandments. So those, I'd like to skip those chapters and go today over to Matthew 5. In Matthew 5, we find the Sermon on the Mount. And in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus addresses each of the 10 Commandments and gives the people an understanding of how the new covenant is different from the old. The new covenant took what was in the old covenant and extended it. It didn't delete it. It didn't get rid of it. It said, okay, you understood that before you were not to murder, but I'm going to explain to you that I don't want you to be angry. So it's like taking each of the 10 Commandment concepts and extending them into the new covenant, into what Christ is bringing to us. So another thing you need to know about Matthew 5 is this Sermon on the Mount was probably a model sermon that all the apostles knew and memorized and could preach. And they probably had been preaching it maybe 30 years before it was even documented in the Gospels. We have the document of the Sermon on the Mount. And the reason we think this is because of the design of it. If you were to read the Sermon on the Mount in Greek, you would see it, because you would see like alphabetic signals, A, B, C, D, like the starting of the words. Remember how we looked at that in some of the Old Testament scriptures? And we used that to show how that was an oral tradition to make these little tricks of the verse. Also, the number of things, like you have in chapter 5, 3 to 16, you have an introduction with 9 blesseds. In 5:17 to 48, you have 6 things from the law. You have murder, adultery, divorce, oaths, eye for an eye, and love your enemies. You have 6. And then in the next portion, you'll have a set of another 6 things that talk about pride, prayer, fasting, and then the conclusion, which is 3 things. So it's kind of like it has a numerical pattern to it. You got the 9, you got the 6, and then the 3. And they align with the old law, the order of the old law, and what the Jews would have been familiar with as far as the teachings that had gone on. So we really think that the Sermon on the Mount is a model of the most common sermon that Jesus taught, because it really does speak to the Jew and the Greek and explain to them who God is and what he wants and what his role is to be with us. Now, in Jewish culture, that was common. When you learned, Jews were notorious for being well educated. They would begin teaching their children to read from early age so that they could read the Torah. That's what that thing is when the kid becomes of age, 12 years old, the bar mitzvah. Part of the bar mitzvah is they have to read from the Torah. And the reason for that is to say that every Jewish male could read the actual scriptures themselves. And that was not common among the other cultures. When they had lots of people, whenever somebody was a popular speaker or had a following, you'd have one guy would be the lead, and then you had like their little group of people that would follow along after them. That's what Jesus did. He gathered people who were learning from him how to preach the message that he was giving out. That was another common practice. The prophets in Old Testament times, we even hear in some of when we read through the prophets, you'll even hear about their group of people that are learning to be prophets and hang around with them. And so this was how this happened. You had disciples who followed you around, and that's what Jesus was doing. And after the disciples, being fishermen, needed to learn how to speak the message. And around Josephus, who was a historian after the time of Christ, but close to the same time, he's not a super reliable one. So sometimes I don't even like to say who that information is from, because Josephus is a little wonky. But one of the things he records is that there were 241 cities or towns in the area where Jesus was teaching at Capernaum and around there. There were 241 little towns. So when Jesus is teaching, he's teaching all these little places, and everywhere he would go, he'd gather a little group. One of his favorite places was along the Sea of Galilee, because they had grazing land there, and if you sat in the right place, if he stood down by the water, and then if the land was rising up from the sea, then he could speak, and a pretty good crowd could hear him in places like that. And so that's where we see these kinds of events happening. He would just gather around with some people and begin teaching, and this would be the kind of lesson that he would give. And as the disciples began teaching, this is what they were teaching. So when we read the Sermon on the Mount, we kind of get an encapsulated message of what Christ was saying. He would go around healing and teaching. And so we know that this is the kind of lesson that he would teach. So if we look at the very first part in chapter 5, starting at verse 3, we see the blesseds. There's 9 blesseds here. You got blessed, 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 and blessed, blessed, blessed. They're in 3 sets of 3, and they connect together in 3 sets of 3. So in first one, and this is the hook, okay? Because listen to what it says. Blessed are the poor in spirit. What? Blessed are the poor in spirit. What are you, some kind of weirdo? What are you talking about? Because why would it be blessed to be poor in spirit? Don't you want to be rich in spirit? What else does it say? Blessed are those who mourn. What? What do you mean? How can it be blessed to be mourning? And then the third is blessed are to be meek. Are we supposed to be confident and go out there and, right? So what this is the hook to get people interested in listening. So he explains each one. He says, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. In other words, if you think you're all that, you don't have room for God to be in charge of your life. It's like saying, blessed are you who are not proud. We would understand that, right? So poor in spirit is the same kind of concept. There was if you have a study Bible, if you look down where it's on verse 3, it says, poor in spirit is in contrast to the spiritually proud and self-sufficient. So it's opposite of thinking, well, I'm all that in a bag of chips. You feel humble. You don't feel proud or self-sufficient. You're poor in spirit. You're humble. So he's choosing that to hook him into the conversation. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. And blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. they would have understood this right away. All these pieces, just like you did. You understand it. It's kind of like when he delivered it, he might have even kind of held off, like you say, blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, because theirs is the kingdom of heaven. You probably gave it with some pause and some, so that you're thinking it through and saying, how can that be blessed? And then he brings in the seal the deal line there, closes it up. Can you see how that would hook him into the conversation? And then we have this little section of the salt and the light on verse 13. So the first part is the hook for the introduction, and now he's going to give a little bit of meat. You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled by men. You are the light of the world. A city on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before men, that you may see your good deeds, that they may see your good deeds and praise your Father in heaven. So, there's this little problem about the salt. The salt doesn't fit the rest of the thing. You're a light of the world, or you're a light that's going to be hidden. But the first part says you're a salt of the earth. That has nothing to do with light, right? And we just accept that. Oh, we get it. The salt loses flavor. It's not good for anything. That's all you use it for is flavor. But that's not really what this is talking about here. Because salt is always salty. Salt is always salty. So what do you mean salt has lost its saltiness? Well, Bill Creasy describes an experience where he went to one of those things where you can have an experience of Bedouins in the Holy Land, and you could travel with them and see how they would camp and live and all that kind of thing. And he said, he described where this woman was going to show them how they make their bread. And they have this, they would make the bread kind of like the dough and flatten it out kind of like a tortilla, but thicker, kind of like a pita bread style, but kind of a bread that's thicker than a tortilla, but that same shape. And then the lady would she would scoop out a little bit of the dirt, a shallow little spot in the dirt. She'd put sticks in there, and she would strike the sticks so they would catch on fire. And then she would put a metal bowl over the top shaped like this. So the heat was warming up the bowl. And then she would flatten and round the dough and then lay the dough on the bowl. And it would cook, and then she would turn it over and cook the other side and hand it off to one of them to eat. And he said they were standing around while she was cooking this food, and she put some bread on there. They were eating it while she would make it, and she kind of picked it up, and then she got a stick and she wedged up the edge of the bowl and she threw some powder in there. When they asked her what it was, she said it's salt from the Sea of I keep trying to say the Salton Sea, but it's the Sea of Galilee that was so salty there. And so she said it's salt from the sea. And she would throw it in, and the fire would fire up. She'd put the bowl back down and cook a little longer on it, and she'd keep throwing salt in. When she was done, she would remove the bowl, and she just push the dirt over the top of it, and that was that. That was the way they would cook the bread. So in the Sea of Galilee, they actually mine magnesium from the salt that's in that sea. They mine it and sell it. That's one of their big manufacturing things that they do there at the Sea of Galilee. So that salty water then would be, that salt that's from the sea would be to make fire. So read this again, thinking of the salt as it makes fire, okay? And see if it makes more sense. You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled by men.
But I was thinking of salt as a preservative. So you are the salt of the earth didn't bother me from I was thinking, you are a preservative of the earth, kind of.
And I don't think there's any problem with thinking that way, except that salt doesn't lose its saltiness, and that's always kind of bothered me. Salt is always salty. But yes, if you want to pretend that salt could lose its saltiness, you still have the same meaning here. I also think that the magnesium that's in the salt makes sense with the rest, which is about fire and light. And so I kind of feel like it kind of goes along with the rest of it. Anyway, it's very interesting, huh?
When you cook, if you forget to put the salt in, you will not have the sweet. You require the salt to get that
To have the sweet. Yeah, that's very true.
Interesting.
It's very true. Okay.
That's why salted butter tastes sweet to me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so then that's the introduction, and all of that would have been a very catching introduction to the message. And now we get into the law. So in verse 17 now, he's going to step on some toes, talking to them about the law. They know the law, and they know the prophets. They know those. So now he's going to begin stepping on a few toes. Do not think I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. So when he says that, what's that make you realize? Some thought that's what he was going to do. Get rid of this stupid law and the prophets and all that stuff. We're over with that. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. I tell you the truth, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter nor the least stroke of a pen will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. By the way, the King James Version used jot or tittle, and that's the smallest mark. In Hebrew, there's no vowels. And so they would use little marks to represent how things could be pronounced. And they were just like little dashes, like for us to think like no comma or apostrophe, we could say. No little mark, no dotted I will be taken, no dot off an I will be taken off. Verse 19, anyone who breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever practices and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses, any other words used there? Exceeds. Any other? Surpasses or exceeds that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven. Darn, they said. We thought you were coming to abolish the law and get rid of it. Now you're telling us we have to exceed it? What are you talking about? What can you mean by that? So what's he pick up on? Murder. In the 10 Commandments, murder is the first shall not. What's the second shall not? Adultery. Look at verse 27. What's the approach? Adultery. Next in the law is stealing, lying, and coveting. And that kind of falls apart there. It doesn't have the same pattern. But he's hooked them into the conversation, right? So he's going to explain to them how this new thing he's bringing is going to exceed the law. Now, would they be happy about that? No. The law was already hard to keep. It was already a challenge. And now he's saying you have to exceed it or surpass it. They're probably like, oh, brother, this is going to be impossible, right? Let's take a look at verse 21. You have heard that it was said to the people long ago, do not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with his brother will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to his brother, Raka, is answerable to the Sanhedrin, but anyone who says, you fool, will be in danger of the fire of hell. Therefore, if you are offering your gift at the altar and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to your brother, then come and offer your gift. Settle matters quickly with your adversary who is taking you to court. Do it while you are still with him on the way, or he may hand you over to the judge, and the judge may hand you over to the officer, and you may be thrown into prison. I tell you the truth, you will not get out until you've paid every last penny. So the law says do not murder. But in our new covenant with Christ, we're told not to be angry. Where does murder start at? Anger. Starts from that inner anger that's happening. That's where it begins. So God is saying, okay, right, you're getting mad, you're making all kinds of accusations, but I didn't actually kill him.
But you know,
I want him to be dead. I wish he was dead. I wish somebody else would kill him. We can think of all different ways that maybe that's not murder. But Christ says, now I'm calling you to a new thing. This is the same difference as when Don Luz was 10 years old compared to when he was 60. At 10 years old, every dime has to be a certain place. But at 60 years old, he should know now how to use his money. And at times, might he even adjust those dimes in a certain way to meet the intent of what his funds are supposed to be used for? That is a part of what happens as we get older. And that's what Jesus is saying to them, is now, before you even get to court, settle the issue if you can. Don't wait till some judge, who knows whether that judge knows what he's doing. Don't wait till then to have the judge settle the matter. Attempt to settle the matter first. Don't be angry, because anger is what starts the whole roll down the hill toward being murderous, right? We're supposed to address it sooner than that. And then look at, take care of things quickly. Don't let it wait and simmer and get worse and worse. Don't let your thinking get out of line, right? Because you're letting it simmer. Back it up a little bit. Those are all ways that we can protect ourselves against breaking the 10th commandment, which is murder. But Jesus says, deal with the anger. Deal ahead of time with what it is you need. Now, would it be appropriate to remove yourself from a situation where you're becoming angry? Or do you have to settle it? Like, what if Julia is just impossible? I just can't even talk to her, and we just argue all the time. So how can I avoid that situation? Is there a way to move around that? If I just can't, I'm just too mad at her to even look at her straight.
You should take some time.
I should take some time away? Is there anything wrong with that?
No, I think it's definitely the wise choice when you feel overwhelmed with your anger to take time.
There are all kinds of techniques for dealing with being angry with a situation, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can talk it through, but sometimes you can't get it talked through. Right? It?
Sometimes I have written letters to people that I tear up. I was like, I need to just
Get it
this
out.
off my heart, and it's like, okay, now you gotta let it go.
Right. I've heard of people who'll do hard work, like they'll go out and do yard work or something physical, just to get the energy, that angry energy out. Yeah. My mom would start cleaning, but everything would be slammed around, bang, and all of us girls would like go, okay, we would all disappear.
Angry cleaning.
Yeah, angry cleaning. Yeah. There are a lot of techniques that can be used, but the point is to set in our minds, not that we don't murder, but that if we're holding on to anger or resentment, that's a problem. And we can solve those problems there. And I've known people who've had to completely separate themselves, distance-wise, from certain people or situations. If that's what it takes, then that's what it takes, right?
It's not all bad if the person slams out of the house, because, maybe they're going off and they will not be able to say something that they're gonna regret later on if they had stayed in your presence.
Oh, I've had many arguments with David when he's not even present. And
I bet you win all of those.
I win all those, right? And it's so funny because if I'm going for a walk and I'm saying, by the time I get back, I'm all over it. I said what I needed to say, and sometimes you just have to give yourself space and a little room to vent just out in the open air as you get some exercise or whatever. You separate yourselves. And then when you come back, you can be more reasonable. So you have to think of ways, be creative on this end, not on the other end of just doing it and then asking for forgiveness. You need to do preventative part of it.
Yeah, that was kind of like his message this morning about
I did not
we're all
even
tempted, and it's not from God. That's not
I didn't know that he was preaching this morning. So
It was really
every
good.
week my lesson has been aligning with Charles, and then now there's a different preacher, and my class at 8:00 knows that I did not plan this before knowing that message. But it really is funny how it all. Okay, adultery, verse 27. You have heard that it was said, do not commit adultery. But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into hell. Oh, I couldn't help it. I just saw her, and I can't help what my eyes see. So there's the hyperbole that Jesus is using. Well, then just gouge it out. Of course, you can help what your eye sees, right? Of course, my hand just did it without me even realizing, no. You control your beings. And that's so Jesus' hyperbole is in, well, then cut it off. If you can't control it, but of course you can control your eye. Of course you can control your hand. Of course you don't need to cut it off. But that's the point. They quit making excuses for why that happens. Notice his technique, he says. You've heard said, do not commit adultery, but I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully, when do you prevent adultery?
Whatever happens.
When the first thought comes in mind, after thinking.
I think too, you don't put yourself in positions. My son-in-law has always worked with a lot of women in high power, and his wife was a stay-at-home. He doesn't go out to lunch with the women. He doesn't, he's like, and not that he couldn't, but it's like, why put yourself in that position?
Right.
To be in an uncomfortable situation. So I always thought that was kind of smart.
And you also have to be attentive to what things look like, what it looks like to others when they see your interaction or how that presents itself. Those are all important ways to prevent. Julia?
There's another occasion where Jesus talks about this divorce issue too in Mark. I was just reading that this morning. I was like, this sounds a lot like what
Right.
in Mark chapter
Also,
10.
the divorce part.
Yeah, because the
that's
Pharisees came and challenged him about, well, what do you say about divorce?
First
Because-
Corinthians has a good passage too. Yeah, the next section is on divorce. It has been said, anyone who divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce. But I tell you, anyone who divorces his wife, except for marital unfaithfulness, causes her to become an adulteress, and anyone who marries the divorced woman commits adultery. So it's tying into the adultery piece, but it's saying that because in Deuteronomy, they were given the ability to go to the priest and request a certificate of divorce. And there were certain reasons they could do that. But what happened, it happened twice that we read the last time when we went through all the Old Testament material. There were two different times when the Jews came back from their dispersion back into the land. And there were some pretty popular cult practices going on. And like in Corinth, in the city of Corinth, the temple of Aphrodite was there. And they would have priestesses that you could go in and enjoy services with as a part of your worship. And they were 16 to 23-year-olds. And at 24, they were retired from being priestesses, and they were highly desirable for wives. And many of the Jewish people were scolded for coming back after and divorcing their wife that they had had for whatever number of years so that they could marry one of these priestesses who had more skills that they enjoyed. And so it was a conversation about, why are you divorcing the wife of your youth, that kind of thing. And divorce, the whole certificate of divorce was being misused. But there were divorces. And what this is saying is that when you divorce your wife for no good reason, for not a reason that's an allowable or reason, then what you do is you make her an adulteress because she can't get married, or if she does marry, God doesn't recognize that divorce, and you're creating an adultery problem. But where do you take care of the adultery problem? At the concept. So same thing with divorce. You don't take divorce lightly. That's not something but there are reasons for divorce. And there's more about that in 1 Corinthians, a couple places, but I don't want to get all on divorce because we could spend and we have a couple times spent all on divorce. But you're right. The scripture does talk about reasons there are for getting a divorce. Oaths. Again, you have heard that it was said to people long ago, do not break your oath, but keep the oaths you have made to the Lord. But I tell you, do not swear at all, either by heaven, for it is God's throne, or by earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make even one hair of it white or black. Simply let your yes be yes, and your no, no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one. Why would Satan have an interest in our word, our oath, and in tempting us to say things that are untrue? Why would that be something that God would be concerned about, that our yes be yes, our no be no? That we should not even have to swear on anything. What is our job now as Christians in the New Covenant? If I'm going to go spread the word of Christ to someone, and my word is not true, I say things all the time that are exaggerated, or I don't speak up when I should. If my word is not, if I may say yes or no, but it's not, may or may not be exactly right, then do I have a testimony? What happens when I try to tell someone about Christ or about living a godly life? I'm a hypocrite. I'm a hypocrite. So he's saying you shouldn't be swearing by anything. Don't say, on my child's head, by the earth, or by, don't swear on anything. Nothing gives you more credibility than just making sure that when you say yes, you mean yes, and when you say no, you mean no. And when you don't know, you shut up. Right?
Or you say, I don't know.
Oh, you could say that. Right? You say, I don't know, or you just be quiet and don't say anything that you don't know. Don't be speaking about what you don't know. If it's your opinion, then say it's your opinion. If it's something you've researched, then show where the research is. There's a superintendent, and I try to be really careful because I'm a superintendent of a small rural school district, and we have a very low assessed value. And so at the state level, there's a lot of equalization and state funding that comes to our district. And a lot of times I'll be asked about things representing the school districts like ours. And since I've been, I was 19 years in Welton, I've been 8 years now in Somerton, so I have kind of a length of experience, and I teach school finance for the college, so they think I know. So I don't always know, but I know some more than some. So they'll ask me things, and I have found I've had to be really careful to not say something that I don't know. If it's my opinion, I'll be really cautious because they'll quote me and say, well, Dr. Knoll said, and I'm going, ooh, what if it's wrong? You know, so I've learned to be really careful with it. There's one guy among the superintendents that I work with who never speaks what he doesn't know, at least in my hearing. He's very cautious. And what's happened is he's become someone that people really count on for figuring things out. And new legislation came up this last week that we were discussing it. Superintendents around the state were discussing whether this legislation was good for us or bad for us. We were trying to figure out, it was very complicated. And we were talking about all the different pieces. And this other superintendent was on that call, but he never said anything. And that made me be very quiet because I'm thinking, okay, there's stuff we don't know here. And so I mentioned one point that I understood as a question. I said, I would consider that a question that should be being asked is, and that's the most I would say, that we need to find out how that affects, if you have a low assessed value, what the cost then to the state will be. If a low assessed value area spends 70 cents per assessed value, then that's not going to draw very much money. But you say the state's going to make up that other half of the money. Does the state realize how much money that is? And one of the other superintendents said it's $13 million. I don't know. That's what they said. So we were talking about, has anybody even analyzed this cost? So then just yesterday, I got an email from this superintendent. His name is Sean Rickard. And he put an email out, and it had all the details. And it showed how certain school districts would come out favorably, like Somerton School District would get about $2.5 million more dollars. But statewide, it'll be a very expensive thing because the cost then goes to the state. So I'm thinking that's what I want to be. I want to be someone who does not speak about what I don't know, and that can ask the right questions. And I want to be like a Sean Rickard, that when I do say something, I have the information that goes with it so that I can be truthful. If I can be like that, then when I speak on anything, even if it's not school finance, I will have people able to listen to me. They'll trust what I'm saying to them because they know that I've checked it out or researched it, or I have a valid opinion at least. If it's just an opinion, at least it's a valid opinion to consider. And that's what he's saying here. When you make an oath, your word, what you say, should always be very carefully spoken so that people can trust you. And we know, as we've lived in the new covenant, that's because we're the ones teaching people about Christ. And so if we're not trustworthy, how can we be someone to tell them about Christ? How can they trust our word on something like Christ? Okay, verse 38. You have heard that it was said, eye for an eye and tooth for tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn him the other also. And if someone wants to sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. If someone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. What is that preventing? If you know you're always going to give more than you're asked to give, then do you ever feel cheated? Can anyone cheat you?
No,
Isn't it funny? Pardon?
because you've given it to us. I don't need to cheat.
It's a whole different thing, isn't it? It makes you realize who everything belongs to anyway. Is it even yours? We're just managing it, right? And I want to be a good manager, so I'm not going to be wasteful, right? But I'm also not going to hold on to my little precious belongings, right? There's a balance there of being good stewards and yet not being greedy and holding it in all ourselves, is what we're managing. In that day, if a soldier came by and said, a Roman soldier came by and asked you to carry his armor, you were obligated to carry his armor 1 mile. And so if he asked you to carry his armor 1 mile and you were following after this, you would carry it 2. You would do that much more, just to show that you are a godly person, that you're not going eye for eye, tooth for tooth, every little thing exactly right. Do more than's asked of you, and it fixes that greediness, selfishness kind of attitude where we think everything belongs to us. It doesn't belong to us anyway. It belongs to God. You have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. He causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your brothers, what are you doing more than others? Do not even pagans do that? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. What is there? If you love people who love you, well, good for you. Most people do. Right? But if you can love someone that's unlovely, the hardest ones for me to love? I don't like it when people stink. It bothers me. So, of course, every stinky person that comes along has to come and talk to me. God's helping me get over stinkiness. We have certain things that are harder for us to relate with, and we all have whatever our different challenges, but we're asked to define that as love. That's how we love people, is by not rejecting them based on little silly stuff. We're supposed to find ways to love people, find ways to encourage them. So then, starting in chapter 6, we go into the 6. It says, listen, be careful, do not do your acts of righteousness before men to be seen by them. So we're going to go on the 6 things that we're supposed to do. And when the first 6 were about things you don't do, now we're going to go into the 6 things that you are supposed to do. And we'll start that next time. We'll also look at the new covenant and in Hebrews and Jeremiah, where the new covenant is predicted. And then we'll go back to where we left off the history then. We'll go back to Exodus 24 then and start up. So I'm hoping next time that we'll finish out this Beatitudes and how Jesus describes the law, the new law. And that's our new covenant that we're in. And we'll go back and get back into history to see, okay, what happens after Moses gets the 10 Commandments and the descriptions after that. We'll start at chapter 24. And hopefully we can do that next week together. Does anybody have anything they want to add or questions that they want to ask?
One thing
So
I
we're gonna miss next week.
Oh,
Back home.
oh no. Well, you can listen online. I'll post it up. I have the Facebook group, or I'll post it, the recording on YouTube. Yeah, so you're welcome to.